What's up, everyone? Good morning again. It's your host, Carlos Ponce with Advancio Talks here. And this is episode 20 of season 2 of Advancio Talks. We are live. And today we've got Yoshi O. Cearnaigh. I hope I pronounced it correctly. We practiced it several times before we went on the air. And he is the Chief Science Officer at Aeon Blue with us today. And I'm going to let him introduce himself in a minute. Okay, but let me just tell you this. If you, the viewer, are just discovering us, well, welcome. And if you've been here since the very beginning, since 2022, well, you know what we are about. Advancio Talks is where we sit down with the people actually building the future of business and technology. Not just talking about it, but doing it. You know, CTOs, founders, the folks making decisions that matter. So whether you're drinking coffee, commuting, or just curious about what's actually happening in tech, stick around. Yoshi's got stories and insights you will not find anywhere else. So let's jump right in. Yoshi, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. It's our pleasure too. And just out of curiosity, I think you're in the way over there north in the East Coast over in Canada, right? Is that
That's
correct?
right. Yeah. Cape Breton Island. It's
Wow.
it's a great big island or cluster of islands off the coast of Nova Scotia,
Uh-huh.
sort of on the furthest northeastern edge of the continent. It's not the furthest. Newfoundlanders get that one, but
Uh-huh.
we're close.
Close. Yeah. Nova Scotia. It's I've seen it, and I used to have a pen pal when I was in my teens that I wrote to, and she was there. There was two of them in Nova Scotia. But anyway, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about, to us and the audience, of course, a little bit about Yoshi. Who is Yoshi? What's your background? What's your story? How did you end up here? Let's start with you, and then we'll continue with the rest.
Sure. Yeah, I'll tell you about myself. First of all, I am a father, and I homeschool my children, and you might hear them a little bit in the background. So they're in
Uh-huh.
the next room. As a sort of a personal story, what I found was that when you were running your own business
Right.
and when you are traveling constantly, you know, it's a difficult life, and there's a good chance that you'll give up a lot of that, family life. And so made the decision to teach my children and drag them all over Kingdom Come with me so that I could participate. And they can too. They get to see what dad is up to all day.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I'm pretty much along the same lines. So I hear you, and I totally relate to that. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, now
Let
tell.
me tell you about my background. I'm Yoshi O. Cearnaigh, and
Oh,
I
yes,
am
please, by all means.
yeah. I'm the Chief Science Officer for Eon Blue, and my background is renewable energy and chemistry and physics and biology. And Eon Blue's technology really grew out of my life's work, and so I'm in charge of direction and innovation for the company.
Hmm.
I got my start back with battery electric vehicles and photovoltaics with a race called American Solar Challenge. It wasn't called that then. It was called something else. It's been a few decades since then. But our claim to fame was the fastest finishing time per dollar spent. So in a weird sort of way, that actually is a theme that runs throughout my career and throughout the company is just getting farther on less, going faster with less money, less time, less resources.
Hmm.
That's our shtick. So so I moved on from battery electric vehicles to corn ethanol. I was a visiting researcher at Yale where I studied sugar metabolism, and I worked at Los Alamos National Lab on and off for about 10 years, studying biodiesel and algae and archaea and nuclear fuel cycle and batteries and fuel cells, hydrogen and stuff like that. And for my PhD work, I went to Texas Tech, which at the time was the top school in wind. This is before the Ivy League found out that studying wind is worth studying. Wind energy engineering and physical chemistry with a focus on inorganics and electrochemistry. And then I went to do my postdoc in reverse water gas shift. So if you know much about synthetic fuel, you know that reverse water gas shift is this specific reaction that is very important in that process. After I worked on that for several years, I just concluded that it wasn't really the obstacle. It wasn't a problem at all. It was solved. And if I spent the rest of my life on it, I could maybe, move the needle 1% or so. So I decided to focus all my attention on hydrogen and CO2 we call syngas. Syngas is about 80% of the cost of making synthetic fuel. So it's the kind of elephant in the room, maybe 90%, depending on your process. So it's the elephant in the room that nobody talks about, and it's enormous. It's the bullet wound for which we only have a Band-Aid. But in parallel, I've been kind of living this shadow life as an entrepreneur. My parents are entrepreneurs, so grandparents, and so I was kind of infected with the entrepreneurial itch at birth. I guess I would say that that infection or inoculation is being raised to do the hard things and survive really difficult times. And I think that that's probably a major theme for anyone who wants to be an entrepreneur. Yes, especially in tech. Hard tech is a whole different box, and you've got to have some pretty thick skin to get through it. It's a battle out there.
Yeah,
That would be my
is
comment.
definitely in it. But unfortunately, it's a battle that the way I see it, even though that I don't have a technical background, but I've spoken to a lot of people who have similar in this show who have similar concerns, and that eventually it's going to all add up, right? So, and I'm an eternal optimist in the sense that even though all the craziness that we see in the world these days, there's something that eventually is going to prevail, and I believe in good is going to prevail in terms of anything, especially in what you're doing, with the environment and all the resources and how we care to the planet. But it's just going to take a little bit of awareness building, right? Towards the general public, which is no small feat. But that's why we're here. That's why we're trying to do these types of shows to get the word out as much as possible and do our little part on getting the word out. So, Yoshi, tell us a little bit specifically about Aeon. What was the genesis of the company? I mean, how do you feel? Okay, I know you mentioned that you have the entrepreneurial itch, and I am assuming that you said, hey, I'm going to build a company. But how did it all happen? I mean, it was just you in a garage, building something obscure, and then suddenly it blew up. Or do you have a team? Or how did it happen? Tell us the story.
Yeah, good question. Good question. So actually, I had I had the entrepreneurial itch, and so I had already opened and run restaurants and real estate investment and things like that when I was younger. So I had the formula for how to create a company, but I had actually left entrepreneurship to really focus on science and focus on my passion for chemistry, electrochemistry, physics, and solving these great big ugly problems that are facing the world. The crisis of the 21st century, right? Energy and water, right? What are we going to do about our dependence on energy, our need for energy, the effects of our use of energy, global warming, and pollution, and so on and so forth, and how are we going to tackle clean water?
Mm-hmm.
And these are the sorts of things that are going to make and break my grandchildren's lives, not whether or not I was successful at running a cafe.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I went back to school, and I was in a beginning chemistry class. I was learning about the Haber process, which is a chemistry that makes fertilizer. And what occurred to me then was that with enough energy and the right kind of creativity,
Mm-hmm.
you could make anything. You could turn any waste product into a feedstock. You could turn junk into joules. And that's really what guided my study of chemistry and physics and biology was how do we turn junk into joules? How do we take pollution and make it, a product, make it something that improves lives instead of destroys them? And I was going more or less the regular academic route. I was working at Los Alamos eventually under, not directly, but ultimately under Secretary Stephen Chu of the United States. Was obviously I was 15 levels, 25 levels below him, but we were working on hydrogen, and the problem with hydrogen was that after working on it for 5 years as a graduate, postgraduate researcher, I could not come up with any way to make money. I could not conceive of any way to make money making hydrogen. And that's a major problem, because if it doesn't produce money, then it's a cost and it's never going to happen.
Right.
You have to have a business case
Yes.
in order to have a case at all. So I took that knowledge, hydrogen, what we call it the benchmark, right? Which is just hydrogen on purpose electrolysis. HOPE. Is we're going to throw all of the great green electrons we have, as much as we can, as well as all the green dollars, at making hydrogen from fresh water. And all we get is hydrogen, and that's supposed to pay somehow for all of the energy and all of the time and all of the equipment that went into it. And it just didn't work. So I decided, okay, here's what I need to do. I need to come up with a business case, a chemistry way to make hydrogen while also making money. And the strategy there evolved hydrogen and CO2 capture, which once again is the same problem as hydrogen. It's extremely expensive. It doesn't give you very much value. So how do I use the chemistry that I understand to create value along the way to getting carbon dioxide and hydrogen? Now, once I've got the carbon dioxide and hydrogen, so much the better. I can go and make synthetic fuels, or I can bury the CO2, or I can do whatever needs to be done with that. But I made money getting there, and that's the driver. So I spent a decade and a half developing strategies to do that. And I eventually said, okay, the next step is commercializing. The next step is creating a company. And I called a couple people. And entrepreneurship, is very demanding. It's 100-hour weeks and not necessarily a lot of pay. And you have to be both very, very dedicated to the purpose and willing to go through some very difficult times to get there. And I needed someone to really help me out, because as a scientist, they say scientists should not speak unless spoken to. I have some stories about that. My sister at the time, she was a CEO for a social justice 501c3 in California, and I called her up. I said, "Hey, would you consider leading this company? Actually, I didn't do that. I lured her out to Los Alamos with a promise of a home cooked meal. And then I held her hostage there for 2 weeks while I tried to convince her to lead the company.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it worked because she's still leading the company. And she handles, all of our sort of staff and structure and keeping and me, keeping me on schedule. Scientists tend to get distracted by the next big problem
Mm-hmm.
and not so great at running companies,
Right.
So that's how that happened. She joined, and within I don't know 6 months or so, she started bringing other people. She brought Lori, who is I was telling you earlier, she's the magician behind the curtain, the one who makes sure that everything stays on and we all know where we are and who we are and where we're supposed to be.
Gotcha. I was listening to you, and I have several questions lined up for you today, but there's something that is intriguing at at the personal level. As someone who has myself, I've been interested in doing whatever I can within my reach to care for the environment, natural resources, not as a scientist but as a layman, as someone who's just a regular user, a regular guy who's trying to do his best even by composting or whatever it is. So, but from your perspective, what I'm very intrigued about is this: you're working on something that is it's very high level, it's extremely possible and valuable, and in the past, I've seen efforts by others trying to come up with solutions that are clean, that are cheap, that are accessible, that are within our reach, but at the same time, and without getting into the details or without getting too much into the politics of the situation. But I have noticed that there's pushback from mainstream ways of producing energy, or what have you. So, have you yourself encountered such challenges? I mean, have you received any kind of pushback on what you're doing? Can you tell us about that? Or it's okay if you don't want to talk about it, but I'm curious because I've seen it. So,
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. There's pushback for sure. Almost no matter what you do in green chemistry or green, let's say green economy,
mhm,
where you're going to get pushback from the regular actors, or just apathetic participants who don't want to be burdened with extra requirements or don't want to be burdened with extra costs. So that is definitely a thing. However, I would say it goes far, far beyond that. I would say that you get pushback. I think you get pushback as an entrepreneur. You get pushback from day one.
mhm.
Your university mentor who says, get a good job and don't try to do this, and your parent, maybe in my case, I guess I was relatively lucky because my parents are both entrepreneurs, but your parent who says, job and stay. Sorry, it froze for a second there.
That's right.
And also, when you're in the green economy, you have to recognize that the other participants in the green economy, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of question, there's a lot of absence of knowledge, and there can be some pushback from all sides, so that your competitors and your colleagues often have different approaches or different interpretations, and they can push back on you on that. And then, of course, there's the activism problem, which is that, activism is a great thing. Activism is the the way that anything gets changed.
Mm-hmm.
But then the problem with that is that activism exists to some extent simply to create change. And at some point you can expect activists to push back on you. Not green enough, not fast enough, not cheap enough, and question 150% of your assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
So, that I think I would say that's a really important aspect to anyone who's considering a hard tech or soft tech, but especially a hard tech green economy business is to expect pushback, not just from the usual actors, but to expect pushback not just from their own families, but to expect pushback, in fact, from the very would-be allies that are on the front lines.
Right. Right.
Sometimes they have competing interests, and sometimes they are there simply to stir the pot. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just part of being new. That's part of going against the current, is that they're going to be there. They're going to be people there to push back on you.
Exactly. Thank you so much for shedding light into that, because I was, like I said, I was particularly curious and interested. Okay, now let's touch into something else a little bit more on the technical side, on the technology side itself. Um, and of course, you're working with a lot of elements, right? Hydrogen technology, hardware. So I'm curious as to the because I'm assuming that at some point there's some kind of software beyond all the operations of what you're doing. So what are the biggest software engineering challenges you face in managing the complex systems that convert seawater into advanced fuel solutions?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, software is everywhere in our lives, right? And the software challenges that we encounter in building a system like Aeon Blues, they start in the lab, and they continue. They never go away. They continue on through full deployment, through full operations, through expansions, and so there's really no particular stage at which there is a software-free solution, and
Mm-hmm.
there's also no particular stage where the solution applies in the next step. So one of the examples that I think of, because I think you might be interested in this, is a software challenge is that when operating a large facility, like one that produces synthetic fuels, like an Aeon Blue facility,
Mm-hmm.
there are millions of separate components. And each of those components have different delay times. And so when you turn a pump on, does it change the pressure instantaneously? Does it change the pressure slowly? How much does it change the pressure? And how does that pressure change propagate through the plant? The reason I bring that up is because in the green economy, and particularly in electrolysis, what we talk about a lot is
Mm-hmm.
how to turn things on and off.
Mm-hmm.
And that sounds pretty straightforward, but it is an enormous software problem to turn something on and turn something off suddenly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get it wrong, it's a disaster. It's a catastrophe. In the
Right.
best case scenario, you get it wrong and it's only equipment that's damaged. In the worst case scenario, you can imagine how bad it can get from there. So software is a critical component of what we call syncing, the ability of some industrial process to match with the rising sun or the setting sun or clouds or gustiness in the wind. These sorts of things require some of your components to turn on and off quickly, some of them to stay on all the time. And so there's an engineering aspect where you need to keep them on all the time. And then there's a
Mm-hmm.
software aspect where you need to account for the ones that are going to shut off simply because the power's gone.
Right.
Yeah. And so that's as an example, but if you go back to the lab, of course, you're looking at, Aspen, ChemCAD, and all of these sorts of software packages, HYSYS, where you need to use advanced chemical process engineering software to build the models to begin with, so that you know that it's even worth building or not worth building in one particular site or another.
Right.
There's nowhere it doesn't touch.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. And I am assuming that there's some in this whole process, there's some kind of research and development, right?
Yeah.
So, what role does simulation and modeling software play in your process, in your research and development process? And what talent is required to develop these tools?
Yeah, that's the intersection of talents is a difficult one. What talents are required? I think very, very few people possess them all on day one. It's just not possible. And if they do, then they're probably your competitor, not your employee. You need to have, from as a technical team leader, the talent that I'm seeking needs to have very, very solid simulation experience and knowledge with Aspen, say for example, Aspen, ChemCAD, also a high level of engineering familiarity with process engineering, heat balance, that kind of thing. But then, of course, most of the people who have those skills have virtually no chemical experience.
Right.
And so, to some extent, the right talent is somebody who is maybe not the best in the world at Aspen, but is good and is also smart and wants to learn. So they have some of those skills, but they are in a position where they can learn the chemistry. Look, you're not going to find an electrochemist who is a specialist in saltwater electrolysis, who is also an expert at Aspen, at least not under 65 years old and not without a career behind them. They're not looking to join a startup as a young adult. So you instead need somebody who has a basis of education and a basis of knowledge in technical fields and is ready and willing to learn the rest, because you're just not going to find anybody. That person doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah, absolutely right. So, hey, Yoshi, unfortunately, we're running out of time, and they say that time flies when you're having fun, right?
Yeah.
And this is incredibly interesting. And I have time for one more question, and I'm saving it for the last part, because it's like sort of to wrap up. So, looking at Aeon Blue's roadmap, I'm curious to ask. I'm keen to ask you what types of partnerships or solutions partnerships help you accelerate technology deployment while maintaining your competitive edge in the sustainable energy sector?
Good question. What kinds of partnerships? So, to use an example of the kinds of partnerships that we have, there's partnerships on the technical side, which is we really focus in on advancing our particular knowledge set, our particular area of expertise, which is saltwater electrolysis, and some process chemistry around it, chlorine chemistry. And then we rely on technical partnerships, both for the energy generation, so for the wind and solar installation. I have a background in renewable energy, but I just don't have time. So we have partners who take care of that. Also in the downstream, so like downstream syngas processing to fuels. This is a very, very important field. You take hydrogen and CO2 and you make fuels, be it natural gas or diesel or jet fuel. And there are hundreds of companies that are highly advanced at that topic area. So by partnering with those, with organizations and companies that have that expertise, we focus on what we do best, and then we're not as distracted. We're not lost. And then I think another question or another interpretation of your question is, political partnerships, partnerships with our communities, the communities in which we operate, whether that's First Nations communities or provincial communities or local residents in island systems. Those communities are really vital because they help us know what's important to the people. I mean, if you're going to be in the green economy, what's important to people? That's really at the end, you need to have those partnerships in place, and you need to listen to what's important.
Of course, definitely. Couldn't agree with you more. And well, Yoshi, we've reached the final segment of today's conversation, and before we make a couple of announcements, I'm just going to ask you one simple question. Would you? What are your final words of wisdom in general? Whatever you want to say about anything about regarding what we talked about today, so that to leave the audience with or to remember you by. What are your final words of wisdom for the audience?
Okay. My final word of wisdom.
Yes.
Entrepreneurship is very challenging. It's very difficult, and hard tech is an even harder field because the lead times are very long, the construction costs are large. It's a different world than just software, and that is a challenge that you have to have some real dedication and some real meaning, and be working towards some real meaning to stay engaged and to be able to go through the hard times. So I think have a thick skin and don't quit, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and getting to that light depends on those of us who are willing to just keep pushing and keep going, even when international politics don't look so good, even when situations, perhaps the international economy is not very good, and you have to keep going. If you do, it will save us all, and if you don't, it won't.
If we don't, but again, let's summon the eternal optimist.
The eternal optimist is there are enough of us with skulls that are almost as thick as our skin, who just don't quit. And just don't quit. And as long as we keep going, we're going to fix all of this. We are, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, there were pollution issues with the Great Lakes. There were massive smog concerns, acid rain. We fixed them. We are a smart group of people. If we stay at it, we will win.
Right, indeed. I was thinking that I'm going to write the editors of a book, and I'm reading, and I think they should probably include you on the next edition, and it's called Imaginable. I don't know if you've seen it.
I love it.
This is a great book because it's how to see the future coming and be ready for anything. And it talks a lot about a lot of what you just mentioned today. So let me just. Sorry, folks. Technical difficulties here. There's a
truck
noise.
backing us.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes it's just the most untimely thing. But that's, you and I were talking about this at the beginning. It's when you have your home office, you're working from home, you're exposed to all kinds of cats and dogs, and crawling around your desk and things like that. But that's what makes it lively, fun, and human at the same time, right? And well, it's been a great pleasure to have you on the show, Yoshi. I'm going to make a quick announcement, folks. And Yoshi, please, when we go off the air, don't go anywhere. Stick with me,
Okay.
because we're gonna do a quick wrap up. But I need to make a quick announcement about what's coming next week. I want to announce next week's guest, and we're going to be speaking with Trevor Lewinsky. He is the managing partner of a company called Machu Brands. This is entirely a totally different topic about e-commerce and other things. And it's called Transforming Underperformers into Winners, How PE Firms Unlock Hidden Value at Scale. That's going to happen on the 27th at 11 o'clock Mountain Standard Time. Make sure you bookmark your calendars and join us next week with our conversation with Trevor. Bring your questions, and we're going to have a great time, just like we did today with Yoshi. So that being said, Yoshi, it was a great pleasure. By the way, before we go, Yoshi, where can people get a hold of you? Website, LinkedIn?
So yeah, you can find our website. It's eonblue.ca, and that's it there on the screen. Yeah, www.eonblue with an A.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you can spell it, you can find it, and that's the great thing. I also have LinkedIn, so I am active on LinkedIn. So you can find it again there on the screen. If you can spell it, you can find it. If you find Eon Blue, you'll find me quickly enough, and I'm pretty responsive to messages. You can send us an email. Yeah, absolutely. You can send an email for more information if you want to learn about Eon Blue and our technology to info@eonblue.ca, or you can email me directly at cso@eonblue.ca.
There you have it, folks. You have LinkedIn, website, the email. You can't miss it. So that being said, again, Yoshi, it's been a great honor and a great pleasure for me to have you on the show. And for the rest of you guys watching, see you next time right here on Advancio Talks. And Yoshi, stay with me as we go off the air. Thank you.
Thank you.